Day 1 of the Arknights global server. High user traffic, first hour disconnections, back in a time when the usable cast of operators was quite small. You couldn't even make a full squad of 6 stars yet, cause there were only 10 6 stars that existed. Back in the day when staples like Myrtle, Ambriel, and Cutter weren't even released yet, and one of the best sources of damage was Mr. Shring Shring himself, trying to convince Docta to extend the bloodline. Where am I going with this? Well, if you read the title of this video, it's about Day 1 operators who I still think holds up today. I'll just be giving a brief overview of the ones I still personally use. As with these types of subjective videos, if there are any I don't mention, pop them in the comments. I'm definitely not going to be able to cover all of them, especially when I have a huge bias towards casters. Speaking of, Ea Fiala, a well-rounded caster. I'll mostly talk about skill 2, but skill 3 is still pretty cool. In terms of damage output, it's still very usable despite the many other options that outclass it. Cough cough, Surtur Liner, Typhon Logos, Weasadel, cough cough. Especially with that wide skill range, it is nice for taking out a group of tougher enemies en masse. Anyways, gone are the days of the common Ea Fiala and Ifrit skill 3 boss killing combo. Skill 2 is my go-to nowadays. Consistent high damage, the skill costs barely anything, it lowers arts resistance, and isn't helpless against groups of enemies due to the small area of effect it's got. Something so useful, by the way, other dedicated splash casters faded off in usage, at least back in the day. Also on deployment, it comes with a bit of initial SP, meaning Ea does fire those charges off immediately without having to wait for that 5 SP. Ea Fiala has sort of become my default caster of choice when facing most things. She is just that reliable and holds up quite decently today. Liskarm, the SP Battery. Now, I love SP generating shenanigans. I've even got a dedicated squad for the fun skill spamming stuff, and though I couldn't fit Liskarm into the squad, she is still an effective way to generate copious amounts of SP if you can get the setup right. One of my favorite strategies I've ever used is actually during the original CC2 Contingency Contract Blade, the one with Faust in it. And there existed a setup that essentially overclocked Bybig minigunning out skill 2s. That's an example on the extreme end, but generating SP for herself and her allies is quite valuable when paired with the right operator, especially the ones that don't have the auto charge per second clause on skills. And here's the important part about all this, it's fun! Finding the right combination of Liskarm and her SP generating target, and you do get that small dopamine rush for skill spamming, like flicking through whatever brain rot TikTok happens to output that day. Okay, the next video in this opera, wow, that is what talking about brain rot does to you. Sadia, that's the next operator for today. What a fantastic operator. Even after Shu's release, Sadia is still very useful, especially if you didn't get Shu on the limited banner. She's everything you want out of a Guardian Defender. Need to focus on tanking? The stat stick talent combined with skill 1's low SP cost and below 50% health healing requirement ensure those heals go to Sadia herself. Need a semi-consistent general widespread heal? The 7 SP skill 2 has you covered. And if you really want a defender that throws debuffs the same reach as Ea's Volcano, skill 3 is there to help. Healing, holding the line, and helping to enable your other operators all in one package. Still as valuable of a role as ever. Here's another caster on the list, Skyfire, and the reason this video exists. As for why I still use her, that is a lovely question. She's hot? I've always had a soft spot for her, and yeah, there are several higher damaging alternatives, like a lot. But she still manages to show up in random clears, and it may be because of how I play this game. I always have flex spots in my squad for operators I feel like using that day, slotting them in whenever I feel like it, or just building a squad of completely niche strategies. Obviously I've got my meta staples upgraded, but I also have a whole slew of operators that make meta-oriented players absolutely disgusted from all the resources I've invested in them. Skyfire is one of those operators. Not very meta-relevant since day 1, but I still choose to deploy her nonetheless. Cause there's an element of fun, I think, from doing self-imposed restrictions. You might have even seen the many challenge videos out there. Low rarity clears, burb nights, I like my waifu only clears personally. Or you can do a husbando only challenge if that's your thing. Arknights is a strategy game, damn it, and if we can't delete enemies with hot males, then it's a game not worth playing. The next operator is Texas, not the alternative executioner specialist type who is plenty busted, but the day 1 pioneer vanguard form. I only use her for one reason, and to my knowledge, is still only something base Texas can do. Raise the starting DP slightly. 2 DP might not be much at all, but in the first 30 seconds of a map, it could be the difference between deploying the operator you need at the time and, well, not doing that, especially on maps where natural DP generation is crippled. You definitely don't run into this situation all the time, and at that point, are you really still using Texas? But when I need that extra push in tighter scenarios, I do tend to pull her out. The stun from skill 2 also buys you a few more seconds and a chance for a bit more DP. In integrated strategies, Texas is actually one of my go-to vanguards, cause she blocks enemies, generates DP, and brings crowd control that can be amplified with certain collectibles, all wrapped into one operator in a game mode where your squad size is quite small for most of your run. There's probably better options, but I find that Texas works just fine. Well, you can't have Texas without Lapland lurking in the background somewhere. Lapland brings quite the uncommon status effect. I'm sorry, that was a really bad joke, but Lapland silences, preventing certain special abilities from triggering like the exploding slugs. In addition, the effect is inflicted very easily using the simple method of just hitting them. Anyone that Lapland touches gets hit with the silence, which for an effect that isn't really thrown on operators often. A unit that effortlessly spreads it, it's great for when you need that kind of thing. That's it, next operator, who is Blue Poison. Besides the fact that she is just lovely in general, what sets her apart from me is a combination of a couple things. A multi-hitting 2 SP costing skill 1 that fires fast, because she's a marksman sniper, is nothing fancy or anything, but it's just decent damage and consistent. The multi-hitting also strays away from the issue of plinking for barely any damage against high defense enemies, as that extra hit on a different target will attempt to damage a different, more squishy enemy, and it just has a higher multiplier for the slightly higher defense enemies. Similar to Texas, I tend to use her a lot in integrated strategies. She's another operator that just works for me. Cheap on the DP cost in a mode where DP isn't as freely available all the time, and being able to output meaningful contributions makes BP a nice operator to use. Nightingale, a lovely medic who's haunted all of my off banners in my early to mid game account pulls, but what makes her lovely is not her healing, but a couple of still fairly rare forms of utility as of the making of this video. The first is her ability to drop a birdcage with lots of health and lots of arts resistance, which does have a higher taunt level, meaning you can use that decoy to block hits. Soak up those bad hits, use it as cover as you deploy other operators nearby, there's options. Then there's the more known thing about Nightingale, her ability to increase the arts resistance of allies in range, and the big reason why I still use her. With skill 2 and especially skill 3, the threat of arts damage on your operators is heavily minimized. Lots of casters or general arts damage, skill 2 short SP cost has you covered. A boss enemy that leans heavily into arts damage, skill 3 can mitigate that pretty well, at least for the full 60 seconds it's up for. This arts resist granting capability is why I still use Nightingale. As of now, there's no one better. Of the same medic subclass, it's our favorite Rhyme Lab owl, Telopsis, or as Watch Mojo once referred to as
Teopulsis.
Yup, that is a real clip. Where Nightingale has damage mitigation, Teopulsis makes it up for in straight healing. Skill 2 goes mad on the frequency of healing, which really ups everyone's survivability, as the operator will likely be topped off before the next attack lands. And as a bonus, everyone who regenerates SP of the auto type, which is most operators, builds that SP faster due to her passive talent. Vanguards generate DP quicker because their DP granting skills come up sooner. Simple, but some fairly valued qualities in a non-offensive operator. Moving down to the Abyssal Hunters, which to my knowledge, there was only one that dropped on launch day, Spectre. Another short segment because all I need to talk about is her ability to be temporarily immortal for up to 15 seconds, unkillable in the HP dropping to 0 sense. On top of that, you can choose when that happens due to the manual activation type of skill 2, which is where the immortal giving effect comes from, and how I usually use this is for stalling purposes. If Spectre after deployment can survive for 5 SP's worth of time, skill 2 can be fired off. That skill duration is time for you to try to take down the troublesome enemy before our shark friend expires, and she's still a decent Centurion guard if you need that subclass in your roster. And to top off today's list, I'm going to talk about Ifrit, also known as nice single tile lane you have there, too bad it's all on fire. Get in the line of death if you ever dare to slightly inconvenience Ifrit, as she dishes out a ton of damage, even blipping enemies from one tile is pretty good, but you probably want the full line more for maximum roasting. When I find that perfect choke point or super long lane on a map, I always think, can I turn this into an Ifrit lane? When it works out, it feels great, watching the ensuing barbecuing of enemies. quite literally if you have the Coral Coast skin. And if pure damage isn't your thing, she also debuffs, supporting your other attacking operators further. Shred defense with skill 2 or lower arts resistance with skill 3, all while incinerating lane, and it is satisfyingly fun to set up. Also big damage, that too. Ifritate's ability to turn enemies into ash given the right setup is still pretty good today, I'd say. And yeah, those are some day 1 operators I still use on my account. Obviously there are tons of operators out there, and we're often talking about the newest ones. So here's a spotlight on some of the oldest. With that being said, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.